Think we're ready, inshallah? Okay. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us on this 24th going into the 25th of Jumad al-Ula 1445. Years ago, in the year 1426, I was, after having established Salat al-Fajr, sitting at my house eating a bowl of cereal. And while I was there, a broadcast came on the radio. I used to regularly listen to the news on the radio. And it announced that the Shaikh Ahmad Yasin had been killed by rocket fire. The Israelis had fired 2 rockets that killed him, his son, and an attendant with him that were coming back from Salat al-Fajr from the masjid. And I thought, subhanallah, this was an old man. He was there with his son. Like, what would be the purpose behind this? And why was this done at this time? Not when he's young, not when he's in the height of his powers, but when he's significantly older. Why would this happen? And so I did a biography of him on the radio. And the biography lasted a little bit over about an hour and a half. And it was met with all types of phone calls of people that hadn't known about this man. And the overall thing that people kept saying was, we didn't know this about him, we didn't know that about him. Where can we find more information? The radio host ejected the mini disc after my recording and said, we do not want to have a replay of this after. Because as you know, when you have recordings that you do on the radio, they'll have the mini disc with a long form play of it, and then they'll replay it over the night or sometime in the future. He said, we don't want to do a replay of that, because he was worried about the repercussions that might come from it. So I took the mini disc, and since that time I've not been able to find it. With what's going on in the press, I wanted to now present it again in a little bit more of a polished fashion to give an understanding of the Shaykh Ahmad Yasin, what he represents, the Jama'at that he founded up until his death, and then also read the charter of the Jama'at that he founded. It'll give us a much better understanding and explaining what he is and what he's not, what the Jama'at is that he founded, what they are not. So to begin, Bismillah, we are talking about his name. He is Ahmad Ismail Hasan Yasin. Ahmad Ismail Hasan Yasin was born in the year 1357. In a village called Al-Jawza. This village is in the southern portion of the city of Gaza. And is not far from an adjoining city referred to as Asqalan, which the children of Israel today call Ashkelon. Right? It's another occupation. But it's known as Asqalan. You will recognize this because we are aware of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. It's the big Imam. His lineage extends back to there. Now, Shaykh Ahmad Yasin, as we can see from his name, Ahmad Ismail Hasan Yasin. His father's name is Ismail. His father dies when he is 3 years old. And then when Shaykh Ahmad Yasin is 10 years old, in the year 1367, which on the Kafir calendar is 1948, the Nakba happens. So he's 10 years old, and Israel gets declared a state, and all the wars and battles happen. His mother's name is Sa'da Abdullah Al-Hubayl. Sa'da Abdullah Al-Hubayl started calling Shaykh Ahmad Yasin, she started calling him Ahmad Sa'da, because there were so many Ahmeds in his family that when she would call him, all these Ahmeds would turn around. So he had a lot of siblings, uncles. So to differentiate him from all the other Ahmeds, he was called Ahmad Sa'da. He grew up in a good family, and he had 4 brothers. When the Nakba, the year that the Nakba occurs, which is 1367 or 1948, the year it occurs, his family have to flee for their lives because of the incoming Israeli invaders that are slaughtering, killing, and expelling inhabitants. He, as a youth, lives in a tented city near where he grew up, a refugee camp. And he spent his early years there learning the religion, studying Quran, and he ultimately wound up getting married there as well at a young age. He had 4 daughters and 2 sons. The Shaykh from a young age always kept himself busy with his family. And attended a school at the refugee camp for fiqh and Quran. This was called Madrasa al-Imam al-Shafi'i. Madrasa al-Imam al-Shafi'i. So the Shaykh was Shafi'i in his fiqh, but studied the i'tiqad books of Ahmad ibn Hanbal in early generations. So he studied the Wasitiyah. He studied al-i'tiqad by Imam Ahmad. He studied the Lum'ah. And he carried on in the same capacity until after he was 15 years of age, approaching his later teenage years, he suffered an injury in 1371, which is 1954, the Kafir calendar. He suffered an injury. This injury was while he was wrestling in his sport class, and he fell at an angle. He felt a shooting pain go down his back. After having fallen on his head. His trainer, who was overseeing the class, his name was Abdullah Siyam. And Abdullah Siyam would later be killed by Israelis in a military strike in Beirut in AD 1982. Although he witnessed the Sheikh's injury, the one that had wrestled the Sheikh and accidentally injured him became the best friend of Sheikh Ahmad Yasin. And would take him to doctor's appointments. The doctors were initially not sure when he went to the hospital how bad his injury was. And so he kept walking on that injury, and his condition became progressively worse. Until finally, upon X-ray, they found that some of the vertebrae in his neck had been disconnected. And were out of place. And that as time went on, what would happen was he would lose the ability to walk. Well, in his youth, he carried on walking, but he did so with great difficulty. And he would often fall down, but push himself back up and keep walking. Sometimes he would shake while he walked and lose his footing. He described it as being like a small baby learning to walk again. And then the time came where he couldn't even grasp a pen except with great difficulty. But he had many friends who loved him, who said that they would take care of him. And when the time came where he could no longer walk, he decided to pursue education at a deeper level. He winds up going to Egypt after the year 1367. After the year 1371. He goes to Egypt after that, which is 1954. He goes after that year when he's in a wheelchair. And he studies the Quran further from Hasan Asim, fiqh, Shafi'i fiqh. And he learns from some of the scholars of the time, which are the contemporaries of Sheikh Muhammad Abu Shahba, and it is there that he is first made aware of a fatwa that had been given by the scholars of the Muslims, that there's consensus that Palestine at no time is to be abandoned, and jihad must be waged to fight for it. So he decides he's going to head back to Palestine, but he doesn't know what he's going to do to come back, what he's going to do to fix the situation. He also was there with another Palestinian, Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf Azzam, who becomes the Amir and Imam of the Mujahideen of the Arabs in Afghanistan after some period of time. But he's very, very young at this time. Very, very young. Now, during this time, Sheikh Ahmad Yasin, he comes under the influence of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which was founded by the late Sheikh Hasan Al-Banna, who dies 1368. Hasan Al-Banna is the son of the great muhaddith Ahmad As-Sa'ati, Ahmad Abdul Rahman As-Sa'ati. Ahmad Abdul Rahman As-Sa'ati is a major hadith scholar, and he's one of the commentators on the Musnad. And the Musnad only has 3 commentators. He's one of the authorized commentators. Ahmad As-Sa'ati has 4 sons and 4 daughters. He's an Egyptian. And he's so happy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him with this. He says, I'm going to have each of my 4 sons follow one of the 4 madhabs, and each of my 4 daughters follow one of the 4 madhabs. So each son he selects. And the son that he selected for the Hanafi madhab is Hasan Al-Banna. So he learns the Hanafi fiqh, memorizes Quran, and he winds up founding Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Hasan al-Banna founded that as an answer to secular youth groups that were in Egypt, the Boy Scouts, which the Boy Scouts in Egypt, I can't speak on everyone else, the Boy Scouts in Egypt were often used by Freemasons to recruit children into Freemasonry, and also to get them involved in secular movements like the Voltaire atheist group and debating clubs and things like that. And he saw the general corruption in Egyptian society, so Hasan al-Banna formed what really started as a social group. And he named it Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood. And it swept throughout northern Egypt, middle and southern Egypt. If one looks at his books that he wrote, his most famous being Majmu ur-Rasa'il, the gathered messages, one finds that his creed is the creed of the first 3 generations, and he agrees with the Khalif. You find his fiqh, he's in favor of the fiqh and ihsan and such. But he also has a social message, and his social message is against husbands brutalizing their wives, to get children involved in sports and activities after school, to deal with the rise in public drunkenness and drug abuse in Egypt. But he's also falling foul of the royal family. And when the communist government takes over, Ikhwan al-Muslimin become stalwart enemies of Nasser and the new communist regime. Sheikh Ahmad Yasin is in Egypt during this time after the assassination of Hasan al-Banna. What Sheikh Ahmad Yasin decides to do is he decides to borrow Ikhwan al-Muslimin's social program. So he takes the books of Hasan al-Banna and he decides he's going to take these back with him to Palestine. During the time that Sheikh Ahmad Yasin is in Egypt, the Ikhwan is undergoing changes though, because Sayyid Qutb and other elements have brought Ikhwan al-Muslimin in line with Salafiyah. So it's being corrupted. Because Ikhwan al-Muslimin didn't start off corrupt, it became corrupt. So it starts to become corrupted. And during this time, Sayyid Qutb is writing letters back and forth with another deviated, distorted person, none other than Abu al-Ala al-Mawdudi, right? Whose Tafhim al-Quran is pretty much the Urdu ripoff of Sayyid Qutb's Fi Dhilal al-Quran and Shade of the Quran. Sayyid Qutb's position on the fact that the Muslim Ummah has disappeared and has to be revived, that the whole world has fallen back into Jahiliyyah. Shaykh Ahmad Yasin does not borrow these things. He only takes the social message against drunkenness, drug dealing, and he has a strong base in Islam. And he borrows Al-Azhar's curriculum. When he gets back to Gaza, he finds that there is a man, Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha is one of the founders, well, not the founder, more of one of the missionaries of what's called the Babi cult. And the Babi cult later become the Baha'is. And Abdul Baha, who is described in the biographical account, Ahmad Yasin Ustura Tahaddi, by Ahmad ibn Yusuf, the authorized biographer, Ahmad Yasin describes this Abdul Baha character as wearing a green amama, being a Swiss man, coming from the East, and speaking all matter of falsehood. The Sufis, or the people that call themselves the Sufiya in Gaza, join with this Abdul Baha character, who starts teaching reincarnation and all matter of kufr. Shaykh Ahmad Yasin and others begin to oppose him. And so they start to accuse him, as is the habit, of being quote-unquote Wahhabi, because he's opposing the Babi cult, which later become the Baha'is, and the fake Sufis. As time goes on, different organizations form. So he's back in Gaza, and different organizations begin to form. But the organizations the Palestinians are forming are primarily either secular or Christian. So in AD 1959, the Palestinian Liberation Organization is formed. And they start pushing for a secular approach. After that, you have Al-Jabhatu Sha'biyya li Tahrir Filastin, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They're formed in 1967 by George Habash, who's actually an Orthodox Christian. The PFLP are the very first people to use, in the Palestinian territories, to use human beings as bombs. These are Christians that did this first. And they would call them, because it was ladies that volunteered, they would call them brides of Christ. And they would wear what they would wear on their wedding dress, what they wear on wedding day, bright white colors. And when the Israelis pulled over, that is when they would detonate. The military wing of PFLP was Kitab al-Shahid Abu Ali Mustafa, which is referred to as the Martyr Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades. They were Christian, but they were strong nationalists where they declared no two-state solution, no peace with Israel, Arab nationalism, socialism, and some form of controlled secularism. Another group forms, الجبهة الديمقراطية لتحرير فلسطين, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine in 1967. They were formed by Yasser Abdurrabb. They're Arab nationalists, socialist. You had another one called طلائع حرب التحرير الشعبية, the Popular Front for War, the vanguards of the Palestinian Liberation Front. They formed in 1966. And these Palestinians were actually Baathists, so they were communists. So this is what's happening with Christians and other secular elements. You had Al-Aylul Al-Aswad, the Black September group, which played the part in the Munich killings in the 60s. They formed in 1970, Black September Organization, BSO. All of these groups form, but the Muslims in Palestine are still going through this issue of how do we assess what's happening? Because some Muslims are going towards the Fatah or PLO route. Some are going the socialist route. Some are going the communist route or Marxist-Leninist route. And some are going the Arab nationalism route. But Shaykh Ahmad Yasin, he decides to do something different. He gathers together a whole bunch of Muslim jama'at, and in Gaza, in the year 1394, which is 1973, he forms Al-Majmu al-Islami, the Islamic Congress. The Islamic Congress uses the blueprint. So this forms in 1394, which is 1973 Kafir calendar. Al-Majmu al-Islami takes what Sheikh Ahmad Yasin believes to be the best parts of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the social programs, the masjid building projects, the food drives, and he takes funding from many different sources. So he'll take funding from the Al Saud and use it for what he wants. He'll take funding from UN organizations, use it for what he wants. He'll take funding from private donors. He doesn't care where the funding is coming from, because what he's going to use it for is what he's going to use it for. This is his position. So he is the founder of Al-Majmu al-Islam. He has a whole bunch of people around him. And there is resistance to Israel, but for the Muslims, it's only pocketed resistance. It's not organized yet. It's just pockets. There's groups of Muslims here fighting groups of Muslims, but it's not under a banner. Whereas the Christians and secularists have a banner. They even start calling their fighters the Feda'in, those who sacrifice themselves. Then the first Intifada comes. The first Intifada comes. And in 1408 Hijri, which is 1987, he founds a military wing with Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi. He and Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi, in the year 1408 or 1987 Kafir calendar, form Harakah al-Muqawamah al-Islamiyya, the movement for the Islamic uprising. Contracted, Hamas. What some people just call the Harakah. This is in 1987 of the Kafir calendar, 1408 Hijri. Now, they then publish a charter as well. The charter that they publish is actually patterned off of another big Jama'ah in Egypt, which is known as Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, which broke away from Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah, sometimes just called Al-Gama. They're the biggest Jama'ah after Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt. They write a book called Al-Mithaq al-Amal al-Islami, the Charter for Islamic Work. They write this charter, it's called the Charter for Islamic Work, in 1404 or 1984. And that charter is designed for Islamic work for Jama'ahs in Egypt. Sheikh Ahmad Yasin is inspired by that and decides that he will take the same framework, but he will tailor it to Palestine. What impressed him about it is this Al-Mithaq al-Amal al-Islami was also under the supervision of another Egyptian sheikh who he met there, Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman. So there's a linkage that's there, because he and Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman share in common Muhammad Abu Shahba, the big Hanafi hadith scholar, who his sheikh is Muhammad Habibullah Shanqiti, the big Mauritanian Mujahid and hadith scholar, big Maliki sheikh. So now you're starting to see the linkage between these sheikhs. Now, at the same time this is forming, three other jama'at spring from the Harakah. Three other jama'at. One is called Al-Mujahidun Al-Filistiniyun. Al-Mujahidun Al-Filistiniyun. A second jama'at is called Al-Majd. Al-Majd. And then a third Jama'ah, and this Jama'ah actually formed before the Harakah, but they don't have a charter. You have heard of them in the news. They're called Kitab al-Shahid Izz al-Din al-Qassam, the Al-Qassam Brigades. They actually formed in 1406, 1984 Kafir calendar, a whole 2 years before the Harakah, but they don't have a charter. And many people confuse and think that the Qassam is part of the Harakah, but it is a separate organization. It's a separate Jama'ah. It's a separate Jama'ah. They agree to most of what's in the Harakah charter, but they're not under the authority of the Harakah, although they agree to most of the contents. But the Kitab, the Al-Qassam brigades are not influenced by Ikhwan al-Muslimin. This is one of the points that they differ on. They differ on Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and they differ on the following areas with Ahmad Yasin. And these are the areas where the rest of the ulama differ with him as well. One is الديمقراطية والانتخابات, democracy and elections. Sheikh Ahmad Yasin, his position is that we will use democracy to get in. And then once we get in, that's it. And you'll see that jama'at that have been influenced by the Ikhwan, they will use that as a leverage method. Oh yeah, we'll use democracy. And there'll be only one election. And once they get in, grand opening, grand closing. That's what we're going to do, because that's the system that they're using. Where other jama'at said, no, don't use it at all, because the pitfalls, the issues with it, don't use it at all. So no, we have to use it because of these circumstances, so we'll use it, get in, and then cancel it. And for those that have, as we go along, we'll find out that that's exactly what they did when they got in. They had the elections, did everything else, campaign, got in, grand opening, grand closing. The second issue that they differ with the Shaykh on, this Jama'ah and the rest of the ulama, is the issue of what's known as tafjir. Tafjir. Tafjir is the practice of one using himself as a weapon by putting explosives or bombs or what have you, and he is sure to die and to also kill other people. The neutral expression is tafjir. Now you'll hear two other expressions, but I'm trying to use the neutral expression so I don't get involved in either side of the discussion. Shaykh Ahmad Yasin and those who agree with him from the Palestinians will call them al-amaliyat al-istishhadiyya, martyrdom operations. Al-amaliyat al-istishhadiyya, martyrdom operations. Those on the other side of it will call it qatl al-nafs, the killing of oneself. The middle portion is where people will just say tafjir. Let's call it bombings or explosions. The third issue is women taking part in tafjir or other operations. Scholars differ heavily with him. Number four is his position regarding the writings of Sayyid Qutb. Because Shaykh Ahmad Yasin, his position was that his writings do have massive amounts of errors, but some of it can be reconciled. If we use the rest of the books of Ahl Sunnah, we can temper his works with the rest of them. And the fifth and final thing is his position regarding the tasawwuf groups. He is naturally hostile, not to tasawwuf, but to the tasawwuf groups. So when he knew that people had tariqas or whatever else, he stamped them out. Because you have to remember, when he first encountered this Abdul Baha figure, they were trying to bring in Babism, which ultimately became the Baha'i cult, which believes that Mirza Hussein Ali is another prophet, the Mahdi. He is the awaited one of all religions. And this greatly disturbed him. And since that time, he's been hostile to it. So, we now have the Harakah has been formed in 1408. Out of it has come al-Mujahidun, al-Filistiniyun, al-Majd, and the Kita'ib al-Shahid Izzuddin al-Qassam. The main assisters to Shaykh Ahmad Yasin in that endeavor were Salah Shahada, Imad Aql, and Mahmud Al-Mabhuh. Their methodology, this is initially the biggest Jama'ah in Gaza, and it starts having satellites in the West Bank and other areas. Their issue is that their goal, as he had found in Egypt, is to try to return Palestine back to its original state that it had been in, which includes today's Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jordan. And so Hamas had gotten into Jordan and had attempted to topple the royal family in Jordan on a few occasions, because they believe that they're standing in the way of the Sharia being established. Another Jama'ah forms, though, in the West Bank and in Gaza. And this Jama'ah forms in 1403 or 1981. And this is called Harakah al-Jihad al-Islami fi Palestine. This is called the Movement for Islamic Jihad in Palestine. And this becomes the second biggest movement, and is patterned again after some of the social work done by Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt, by Fethi al-Shiqaqi and Sheikh Abdul Aziz Auda, who is Palestinian. These groups get formed, and then another group forms out of them called Saraya al-Quds. Saraya al-Quds are the defenders of al-Quds. So now you have these groups that have been formed. Shaykh Ahmad Yasin becomes the mufti for al-Majmu al-Islami and also for the Harakah, and works in tandem with the other groups. In the first intifada, they take 2 Israeli soldiers prisoner. And there's a massive revolution of thought. And the Muslims get to see that there is a Muslim alternative to Arab secularism, Baathism, and communism. And so the battle is now on. With this battle being on, the Sheikh Ahmad Yasin, he winds up going in and out of prison. And so the Israelis kidnap him and imprison him and torture him. 1975, 1976. And during this time, there are battles between the Harakah, the Majmu al-Islami, and the Israelis, and sometimes there are hostage swaps. During this time, he starts to form a better understanding of his wider goal. And this, again, is within the 5 things that they differ with him on. Within those 5 things is his position on Israel, not just as the fact that they've wrenched the Waqf from its proper place, but he believes that Israel is part of a wider Jewish conspiracy, a global Jewish conspiracy. And it's because he gets access to the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which has been translated in Arabic. And because of that, he thinks that there's this wide Jewish conspiracy to subvert the world, which most of his contemporaries do not hold this position. But he holds this position. The Afghan Arabs that have been fighting in Afghanistan, some of them are coming home to their home countries, mainly Egypt and Algeria, but some of the brothers being Palestinians. So now the tactics that they've also learned in Afghanistan, they're bringing home and incorporating them. And so now the Harakah al-Muqawamah al-Islamiyah, not only forms these 3 branches, but then starts to form subsections within itself. They form a security section. They form a media section. They form a deen section. They form a welfare section. They create a structure in which the Harakah is able to function almost like a mini country. And the only challenge they have in terms of competition is Harakah al-Jihad al-Islami. That's their only real competition in terms of just sheer size. What they learned from the Ikhwan in Egypt, they replicate on the social level, to the point that the UN NGOs come to them to ask them for help on how to distribute food, how to work with the poor, and they come to them. They're actually able to maintain a level of independence from the UN. Well, Sheikh Ahmad Yasin carries on, and in the year 1411, which is 1989, Al-Jihad al-Islami and the Harakah do a joint attack on Israel. This is the first tafjir between them. Massive explosion in which someone uses himself as a weapon and kills himself using a trip switch and several Israeli soldiers and also some other people passing by. We need to talk about this. This is the issue of tafjir. There are only 4 scholars who adhere to this position of tafjir. 4. This issue of tafjir comes from 4 scholars. Anyone else talking about it now today has taken it from them, whether they know it or not, because this is the only ijtihad like it. It is, obviously we know Sheikh Ahmad Yasin. He's one. The second is Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman. Then you have Imam Wahba al-Zuhayli. And then finally, Imam Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti. These 4, because of a unique reading that they have of Surah Al-Buruj, there's a unique reading of Surah Al-Buruj and 2 ahadith in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Now, what you find for all these men, 2 of them are marja', but all of them are Shafi'is. No other madhab, the other 3 madhabs do not in any way, shape, or form adhere to this position. I've looked high and low. I've not found any Hanbali scholars countenance any of this at all. I've not found any. And the Malikis, who their usul are similar, never. It's never happened. The Hanafis, I've only found 1 or 2 Hanafi muftis from Egypt who countenance this. This is a uniquely Shafi'i ijtihad. And it's something that they specifically apply to Palestine. Why? They give the following reasons for it. Their evidence is Surah Al-Buruj, the 85th surah, ayat 4 to 10. Ayat 4 to 10. It mentions the people of the ditch. The people of the ditch were a group of people that believed in Allah. The one that brought them this knowledge of Allah was a young man. The king was a tyrant. King was a tyrant. The king tried to kill the young man repeatedly, but failed each time. The young man said, "You will only kill me if you hang me upside down, you take an arrow And when you pull it back, you say out loud, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy. In the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy. And you let it go. Then it will kill me. The king does so, and it happens. The people watching say, it's because of the Lord of the boy. And they all enter Islam. The king then has ditches dug and fires set. Some of the people are killed with the sword. Others, he says, you recant on your religion or you go in these ditches. The people refuse to recant their religion and they start pushing them in there and throwing them in the ditch. One woman is there with her baby. Baby's breastfeeding. And when the flame flares up, she recoils back. And the baby unlatches itself from her breast and says, don't be afraid, mother, you're on the truth. So she says, Bismillah, and holds the baby and jumps in the fire. These four scholars, two of whom are marja, derive from this the permissibility of what they call al-amaliyat al-istishhadiyya. They are the only ones with that reading. If you look in all the literature from the first three generations down to now, you won't find anyone with this position. It is a unique reading of that, a unique understanding of that text and coming to a conclusion on it like that. They also allow these attacks, so they give their evidence, that, and then they have the second evidence in Bukhari and Muslim of the companion not wearing any armor and jumping into the fray until he's killed. This is their second evidence. These are their two outstanding evidences. There are others, but they generally fall under the same rubric. There's similar wording like this. Not that my name counts, but I would say their best evidence is those ayat in Buruj and that hadith. That's probably their best evidence, if you really look at it. The other ahadith are more supporting proofs. So, those are their evidences. And then they say, the Palestinian situation is so unique because the embargo on it, the inability to get access to weapons, and the fact that the entire area is a front line. They're in a unique circumstance where they can access it. And so they're allowed to do it. And this ruling was given just for that area, nowhere else. They also state that those martyrdom operations, they call them, weaken the resolve of the enemies. It weakens the resolve of the enemies. And then finally, they say, it puts fear in them. Those are the conditions that that ruling came out of. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, you should understand that 2 of those 4 later retracted their position. Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman in AD 1997 retracted his ruling because he said that the objectives that the ruling were given for to accomplish actually weren't met because the enemy became more emboldened and more strengthened and more strident once these were done. The same thing was said by the Imam Wafa Zuhaili, because he lived to see the wall, because one of the reasons why Israel built that wall was in the hope of deterring those operations. Were they successful? Yes. How long has it been since that wall's been built up until now? There's not been another operation like it. So those things made the Imam Wahab al-Zuhayli say, the reasoning under why I gave that ruling, those conditions were not met, so I retract it. Part of what also changed people's understanding, those two sheikhs, is the fact that in 1993 or 15, the Harakah had another tafjir carried out, this time using women. This completely changed the dynamic for all the rest, and the vast majority of the scholars met this with condemnation. Because not only is tafjir, the vast majority, the overwhelming preponderance of scholars differ in it, but now you used a woman as well. And the attacks started coming much quicker, the attacks used by women. So you had Wafa Sultan, Ayat Akhras. There were so many of them that were coming in succession. And this is one of those areas where he was met with widespread condemnation. Not of him in particular, but his ruling. So his ruling was met with condemnation. In spite of that, those tafjirat, those explosions, they continued, and other battles continued as well. His organizations grew and they mushroomed. Another group formed in 1422 or the year 2000 called Kitab al-Nasr Salahuddin, the Nasr Salahuddin Brigades. So another Jama'ah formed to attempt to accomplish stated aims. But no one near as strong as the Harakah and its different offshoots at Al-Jihad Al-Islami. The Shaykh Ahmad Yasin rahimahullah ultimately meets his end, as we discussed, in 1426 or 2004. 2 missiles striking him down. But before that time, he had built an organization that throughout Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank and parts of Jordan, built masjids, hospitals, schools, after-school programs, and also training camps for their soldiers. A man that was a quadriplegic by the time he was in his late 20s accomplished all of this. That he was able to do all this, that's the really powerful part about all this. Now, after his death, Abdulaziz al-Rantisi takes over the general functioning of the Jama'ah, but he's killed around 14 days after Shaykh Ahmad Yasin. His statement before was, because they asked him, aren't you worried being so high profile that you might get killed? He said, it's better that a missile gets you than diabetes. So I'll take my chances. And so, close to 14 days later, he was also killed. Now, moving from there, Hamas, or the Harakah, I want to read their charter. So we have an idea of what's in their charter, And I'm just going to do a real-time translation. So this is called Mithaq Harakat al-Muqawamat al-Islamiyya, Hamas, Palestine. The Charter of the Harakah. And it's dated the 1st of Muharram, 1409. So this is the first day of a new year on the Muslim calendar, 1st of Muharram, 1409, or AD 1988. They start with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. And they quote an ayah: "You are the best ummah ever brought out for humanity. You enjoin the right, you forbid the wrong, you have Iman in Allah. If the people of the book had Iman, it would have been better for them. Among them are believers, but most of them are rebellious sinners and wicked. They will never harm you except some annoyance. And if they fight you, they'll do so from behind a corner behind their backs, but they'll also turn tail and run and receive no help. They have been stamped with humiliation for what they've brought forth, except the one that's taken hold of the rope of Allah or the rope of people. And they have incurred the wrath from Allah, and they shall be stamped with desolation. That is because they used to reject faith in the ayat of Allah, kill the prophets without right. And that is because they used to disobey and transgress the bounds." Surah Al Imran, the 3rd Surah, ayat 110 to 112. Then the charter, they go on to say, quote, "Al-Imam al-Shahid, the Imam, the Shaheed Hasan Al-Banna, who dies 1368, said, Israel shall be established as a nation, and it shall remain up until Islam brings it to nothing, just as Islam brought to nothing everything else before it." The Shaykh Amjad al-Zahawi, rahimahullah, has said, "The Muslim world is on fire right now and burning. It is upon everyone to grab some water and pour it on the fire. Even if he only has a little bit in the cup, whatever he's able to put out that fire, but don't wait for anyone else to do it. In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, our preamble is, praise be to Allah. We seek His aid, we seek His forgiveness, we seek His guidance, we put our trust in Him, we send peace and blessings upon the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, followers, and companions with abundance, and those who follow his way. We call with his call. We establish that which he established in his sunnah. In perpetuity, always, as long as the skies remain, as well as the earth. What comes next? This is a call to humanity. From the deepest depths of difficulty and desperation, from the great trials and tribulations, we bring forward the wajib of establishing for Allah the call to Allah. For all things that equal the pathway to Allah and the ways to Allah and what true Arabness represents. Those that have been deaf to this call now hear the call. And we must sacrifice everything precious and everything that we regard ourselves with. It has now come to be the case that the point has dawned where we must form groups and jama'at in order to realize our objectives. And one of these objectives was the founding of the Harakah Palestinian Islamiyya, the movement for the Islamic uprising, known as the Harakah, in order to move in the path of Allah and in order to assist all the mujahideen that are in this area, as we had been commanded before previously to liberate and free Palestine. To meet the souls of the mujahids before our time and to give life to the other mujahideen who strove in might and main in the land of Palestine. Up until the time of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Umar, all the way to this day of ours. What you're reading right now in front of you is the charter of the Harakah, which we've abbreviated simply as Hamas, which explains its aims, its objectives, what it's looking forward to clarify, which clarifies its methodology and principles, that which is brought together as its mainstay to give the proofs and evidences so that people understand what our battalions, what our brigades are about, and what they're seeking to accomplish in the Arab world and the wider Muslim world, so that people understand that the enemies must be resisted. Likewise, we've been told to resist the wicked wherever they are, so that people might know the truth of that which has been given to them. Surah Sad, 38th Surah, Ayah 88. And also, where Allah said, Allah has surely written that I and my messengers will be victorious. Indeed, Allah is mighty and almighty and strong. Surah Al-Mujadila, the 58th Surah, 21. Allah has also said, say, this is my path, I call to Allah with clear guidance and estimation. Whoever follows me also is on that path. Glory be to Allah, I am not from the idol worshippers. Surah Yusuf, the 12th Surah, 108. In discussing the matter, the first section of our charter, what can we tell you about the Harakah? Schedule 1. The Harakah, its methodology is Islam. And its ideas come from that. Its understandings, how it conducts itself, knowing that Islam is what's necessary for man, what man is to follow. We make judgment to all the affairs of Islam and we dispose our affairs to that. Another question that may come under Article 1, the thought process of the Harakah. What's the connection of the Harakah to the group Ikhwan al-Muslimin? Article 2, the Harakah is one of the wings of the Muslim Brotherhood, but we're just in Palestine. The Harakah of Ikhwan al-Muslimin is a large Muslim-wide movement and is probably the biggest of the Islamic movements in the world at this moment that we write to you. It has deep understanding, a wider objective and goal, and understandings that match with Islam that will realize the objectives that are being sought. This gathering that's been brought together has been brought together to bring judgment, dawah, teaching, sciences, media work, and other things that are all designed to assist people to discharge their obligations in life. Third article of the Charter. What brought us into being were Islamic reasons that also required politics. Politics for Muslims to get involved with so that the Muslims might give their obligations and their allegiance to Allah and worship Him alone as He deserves. Because Allah has said, I've not created men and jinn except to worship me. Surah Al-Dhariyat, the 51st Surah, 56. And they know that it's wajib to conduct themselves and their families and to establish them on this. So fear Allah in all of that. Raise the banner of jihad against the tyrannical false gods and false rulers, to purify the land, this land, and to purify the slaves from the filth and desecration and evil that those over them have brought. As Allah has said, but truth shall be held at falsehood until falsehood is brought to ruin. Surah Al-Anbiya, the 21st Surah, 18. Article 4. The Harakah welcomes any Muslim that has the same creed as the Muslims and takes by its methodology to assist us, and also guards its secrets and doesn't divulge them to anyone else, and brightens its ranks and strengthens its ranks. And the reward for this belongs only to Allah. Article 5. The time period and place of the Harakah. The Harakah belongs to this particular time that it's been arisen in. We've taken Islam as our way of life up until the point of the Islamic message beginning, and we're firmly grounded in the methodology of the first 3 generations. Allah is our highest goal, and the Messenger is our highest role model. The Quran is our constitution. Wherever Muslims are found, they take Islam as their way of life, and there's no compromise. No matter where they are in any spot on earth, Whether they're in the deepest caverns of the earth or the highest mountains or the highest recesses of the sky, Islam is what they have and what they establish. As Allah said, do you not see how Allah gives the example of a goodly word like a good tree, which its root is firmly established and its branches are stretched out in the sky? Those who eat from it have every benefit that they take from the permission of their Lord, and Allah gives these examples to humanity so that they might reflect. Surah Ibrahim, the 14th surah, ayat 24 to 25. What are the goals for liberation and distinguishing ourselves from others? Article 6. The Harakah is specifically a Palestinian movement to discharge those obligations necessary in Palestine. Its first order of business is allegiance to Allah, and it has taken from Islam its methodology and acts according to raising the banner of Allah over every stubborn kafir in Palestine. And in the shade of Islam, it is possible that others might live under this shade, and those following other religions shall be protected and safe. And they shall have their land and their properties and their rights protected under the shade of Islam. Those who are wicked shall have their strength wrestled from them. Those who are oppressors shall have their oppression taken away from them. Those who practice corruption shall have their corruption stopped, so that their corruption doesn't spread in the earth. These battles, wars, and disputations come about because jihad must be waged against these people. May Allah bless the Muslim poet, Muhammad Iqbal, who said the following: Iman is a waste unless there's trust. There is no dunya except for the one who doesn't have any love for the dunya but strives for himself. Whoever is pleased with the earthly life without any religion, then he's already destroyed himself and is sure to be destroyed soon. These are the words of the poet Muhammad Iqbal. Keep in mind the influence of the Harakah. Article 7. The Muslims are spread out all over. And it is not just the Harakah in Palestine that follows the methodology of Islam and liberating our lands, but it is Muslims everywhere who hold this same position and should hold it, and are in agreement with us, and are strengthening the jihad, wherever we may be, because this is a worldwide movement of striving to protect the jihad and the jihad of the Palestinians. It is upon this methodology that we built ourselves and built our principles, and we ask others to build. As Allah has said, and we send down to you the book and truth as clear guidance to that which is in front of you from the book before, and it's a guardian over it. So judge amongst yourselves by what Allah sent down, and do not follow their desires from that which came to you of the truth. For each one, we've given a law and a methodology. Had Allah He willed, He could have made you all one ummah, but He tests you according to what He gave you. So compete with one another in good deeds to Allah. He is your return. He's the one you shall return to altogether, and He will inform you of that which you used to do and that which you used to differ in. Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah, 48. The Harakah was only one circle of the many circles of jihad against the filthy Zionists who have come and polluted this land that must be stopped. One branch of us that are our brothers are those who are under the banner of the Shaheed Izzuddin al-Qassam and his brother Mujahideen. They were also under the banner of Ikhwan al-Muslimin in the year 1354 or 1936. They strove and they fought on behalf of the Palestinian jihad, and the striving included some brothers from Ikhwan al-Muslimin in the 1367 or 1948 war. And the jihad actions that were done were for our Ikhwan brothers in 1387 or 1968 and what came after. So this should make you understand that our goals will always be to resist the Zionists who stand in the face of the Mujahideen, stubborn in their kufr. The Harakah shall go to carry out the promise of Allah and what the Messenger ﷺ has said: the hour shall not come until the Muslims fight the Jews, and the Muslims shall kill them until a tree will say, "O slave of Allah," the stone will say. The stone and the tree shall say all together, "O Muslim, O slave of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." The only one that will not do that is the box thorn, that is the tree of the Jews. This is collected by Imams al-Bukhari Muslim. Close quote. So, and you understand what they're giving us. This is the one where they're saying, remember, the reason why I'm reading this charter is we're being told that Hamas is calling for extermination of all Jews, but they've said nothing except about the government of Israel, Zionism, and then they gave this quote from the Hadith. That's it. All of what Hamas has said is pretty much been, or the Harakah has pretty much been the methodology that they have. The principles that they're upon are really the schedule. The rest of the articles pretty much break down how the Gama functions, how they deal with war prisoners, the importance of the Palestinians with respect to the jihad in Palestine, how they deal with Zionist troops, and how they deal with collaborators. Right? So we see that much of what they've had to say is pretty standard. Their connection to Ikhwan al-Muslimin is very clear on that. What they've taken from them is very clear. Now, I want to mention a few other points about this. Since the martyrdom of Shaykh Ahmad Yasin rahimahullah, there have been a number of other points that the Harakah and al-Jihad al-Islami had to deal with. Now, we've mentioned that they have accepted money from many different sources to use it for what they wanted. But because when you do that, you sometimes find yourself being affected by other people. So a group formed between the years 2014 to 2019, a group formed called Harakah Sabirin, the Sabirin movement. And these were some Palestinian Muslim brothers that became Shiites. And so al-Jihad al-Islami had fought them, defeated them, and made them come back to Ahl Sunnah, those that hadn't been killed. Another group had formed, which were Jundu Ansarillah, the army of the assisters of Allah. They are an Al-Qaeda outfit and were defeated by the Harakah in 1432, 2009, where they actually brought down a building with all of them inside of it. Jaysh al-Islam, which is connected to Al-Qaeda and also Daesh, they had to be defeated as well by the Harakah and al-Jihad al-Islam, because they refused to declare that jihad was fard ayn on all Muslims, and also that Palestine was Dar al-Harb and has to be brought back to Islam and people have to be called back to Tawheed and so forth. The Harakah and Jihad Islami obviously are not going to do that. And they're also not going to give allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or the others. They're not going to do that. And they made it very clear that they are, as they said in their charter and the others, we are a Palestinian Jamaat to deal specifically with the Palestinian situation. A Jamaat from al-Jihad al-Islami formed in Nablus and also Jenin, called Kitab Jenin. The Jenin Brigades, they formed in 1443 in the year 2021 of the Kafir calendar, and their Shaikh was Jamil al-Umuri. So they formed. And they carried on. Now someone would think, with all of this stuff happening, what are the Palestinians saying about all this? Because there's all these battles, all these Jama'at, what are the Palestinians saying? Well, the Washington Institute for Middle Eastern Studies in June AD 2015 said that in the West Bank, 71% of people had a favorable attitude towards the Harakah and the Jihad Islam. This is Muslims and Christians, because it's the West Bank. And in Gaza, it was 84% approval rating. 84%. Now, after the Shaykh has been martyred, you had the elections that happened in Gaza. And the elections were, you had the Oslo Accords, several attempts at Oslo Accords, and the elections. Why didn't the 12 Jama'at in Gaza and in the West Bank take part in them? Because it's the two-state solution. And as we see from the charter and them who were signed up to most of the charter, they're not going to agree that, because they demand that Palestine has to go back to what it was, which includes Israel, West Bank, Gaza, and Jordan. They're never going to agree to that. And so a war breaks out between them and the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority goes over to the UN, Tarbush in one hand, Begging Bowl in the other, to say, we want you to recognize us as a state and we will be the leaders. They recognize Yasser Arafat as the leader of this banana republic, and they gift them a series of Mercedes Benzes. They attempt to gift some of the political leadership in the Harakah, which Ismail Haniyeh and some others, and they fall under the same spell with the Mercedes Benzes. So when the PA and Fatah is pushed out of Gaza, so were those ideologues. And so the Mujahideen in that area pretty much take control. And as the advice that Sheikh Ahmad Yasin, rahimahullah, had gave, they had their grand opening and grand closing regarding the elections. Oh, they won the elections overwhelmingly. Yes, that's wonderful. Now we're in. Elections are canceled. Democracy is kufr. But you used it before. Well, yeah, we did. But that's because we had to. Now that you know that it's no good and democracy is kufr, now let's get on with the business of ruling with the Shah. And that has carried on since then. No one could believe that they got in like they did. And the PA doesn't dare hold municipal or national elections because they know, okay, the Harakah might not get in, but that doesn't mean the Jihad Islami doesn't get in. That doesn't mean Al-Qassam brigades don't get in. These are big Jama'as. And remember, as we discussed, Al-Majmu al-Islami is the big umbrella organization. So these are Jama'as that have hospitals, schools, masjids. They're not just a Jama'ah. Some other Jama'as that you'll see within the Ummah will be Jama'as where they gather together, they read Quran, or they go and they dress up in certain distinctive gear. Yeah, that's fine. But they don't have any blood and guts inside of them. These organizations in Gaza, they have blood and guts inside of them. They have an entire structure where they have a security structure. They've got all these other things that are working inside of them. And that's why the difficulties that they're having with Hamas and others in Gaza and the West Bank is because they're so well oiled, well tuned, and well structured. Because they really took to heart the idea of establishing a Jama'ah. They really took it to heart. Now, in closing about this section, I mentioned about everything that I could to show that the idea when people are saying that the Harakah is ISIS or Daesh, this is nonsense. Because they're fighting Daesh. They're fighting Al-Qaeda. They wiped them out. The fact that this has happened, when there were Shiite elements among them, they said, you're coming back to Ahl Sunnah, those that they didn't kill. They brought them back. That shows that, yes, those elements will be there, but if you think about the size of the Jama'ah. But their methodology is very simple. Now, we gave an honest presentation of Sheikh Ahmad Yasin and the Jama'ah that he founded and what came from there. So as we know, the overwhelming preponderance of scholars on these 5 issues, democracy and elections, tafjir, women in jihad being used, trying to use Sayyid Qutb's books or others, and his position on tasawwuf, and his position on worldwide Jewish conspiracy, that there's some type of huge monster conspiracy. It's part of a wider conspiracy to kill all the Arabs and things like this. We've already discussed what this was to try to give you as even and fair assessment, but to also give him his rights, because this was a sheikh. And he dedicated his life to this religion. So it was my niyyah to do that and to give the Mujahideen and all their different capacities in Palestine, to try to give them their rights as well, to be as fair as possible to them, but to also mention the areas where other sections of the Ummah will differ with them, that they themselves acknowledge. They themselves acknowledge. So I'll say with that, أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم. Are there questions over what we covered over the life of Shaykh Ahmad Yasin and the Hamas and the organizations that came out of it? Questions? Yes.
Of the four Shafi'i sheikhs who agreed upon on that ruling of tafjir, is it tafjir?
Tafjir. Ta, fa, jim, ya, ra. Tafjir.
One of them's two of them are Marja.
Yes.
Sheikh Ramadan Budi, is the other one Wafa Sultan?
Yes, that's the other one.
Okay. Second question was
Yes.
regarding the statement. What's the deeper meaning? Is it literal, or is there a deeper meaning to it, or is it both? That when the trees and towards the end of time, the trees and rocks will speak out and say that there's a Jew behind me, come kill him.
Okay. Question is regarding the deeper meaning of the hadith about in the end of time, the end of time will not come until you will fight the Jews and you will wind up killing them, to the point to where the trees and the rocks will say, "O Muslim, O slave of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come kill him." This hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. In the commentary literature, they say that it's not that the trees and rocks will literally be speaking, but there'll be some way where there'll be some reason why you'll be able to hear that they're behind them. So there'll be some reason why, right? Some scholars today say it may be something to do with something electronic, right? A time will come, the Harakah. And in addition to that, one of our teachers mentioned Shaykh Abu Walid al-Ansari, Hafidhullah. He mentioned that when he was there, before he finally got driven out of the location where he's from, because he's originally from Jenin, he said that he found that the children of Israel were planting a lot of boxthorn, a lot of boxthorn trees. So whether they know that hadith or whether that's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bringing to bear the truth of that matter, he said when he was there, they were planting a lot of boxthorn trees. So whether it's literal or figurative, Nawawi and others kind of leave it open. And some scholars today say it may be referring to something electronic or something to come. Maybe. So it's kind of left open. Right? But you'll notice that they've quoted that hadith, not talking about exterminating others or anything else. And they've made a very clear distinction between Zionism and Zionists and the Jews as an actual people of religion. They made it very clear. In fact, they said that they're protecting other religions, which was also very significant.
Who's the spiritual head of the Harakah now?
Okay, so the question is who the spiritual head is of the Harakah as of now. Alhamdulillah. Generally, you had Sheikh Abdul Aziz Auda and Fatih Shaqaqi were seen as sort of the spiritual heads. But they also have muftis that they ask from other locales, because Nablus has around 41 muftis. And so when they need help, they ask those muftis. They also ask Muraji' outside of them, because Hamas has jama'at within them. Some of them are Shafi'is, some of them are Hanbalis, some of them are Malikis, some of them are Ash'aris. They have a pretty wide body of people within them. So they'll send questions to Damascus, they'll send questions to places. Any other questions? Questions? No? Yes.
A general question about Palestinian history. With regards to Gaza, do the imams know of its fate in the near future? Will they continue on resisting in terms of with prophetic or like with divine protection, or is there going to be a worsening situation where it slips out further and they get pushed into the Sinai Peninsula?
So the question is regarding whether we have any text regarding the ultimate fate of Gaza. Have we been told anything about it or not? And if so, what will be the fate of the people? Alhamdulillah. There are narratives where the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in Imam Suyuti's collection, others, that a remnant of the victorious group shall always be fighting. And a remnant of that group is at Al-Quds. Right? And Al-Quds includes not just Jerusalem, but the areas around it. Right? So there will always be that remnant that is fighting around that area. Now, there's not been given a specific text about Gaza itself. But the fact that it mentions there'll be people at the end of time fighting around that area, and the Rasulullah even mentioned that at the end of time, and this is when we went through the virtues of Bayt al-Maqdis, there's a hadith in there in which it says at the end of time, there'll be people living in tents around Bayt al-Maqdis in those areas, and Allah will still give them victory. And we see in Dahesh refugee camp and these other encampments, that's the state those people are living in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says those people are victorious. Any final question? No? Yes.
I have a completely generalized question regarding wudu and the hoof. With the hoof, when the person is resident, is activated with its night and its day. So if somebody is to activate the hoof during wudu for the Asr prayer, he will then have to renew his wudu for the Maghrib prayer.
Yes.
Because now we understand this according as a fiqh ruling, but what is its categorization? Is it an invalidator, or is the wudu expired, or which one is it? Because when we look at the invalidators of wudu, in the 8 invalidators, it's not mentioned as an invalidator. So
okay.
How would you categorize that?
Okay. So the question is regarding the hoof and the invalidators of wudu, the fact of the issue with the hoof is not mentioned under the invalidators. Alhamdulillah. The issue with the hoof is going to be mentioned, that discussion, under the topic of the hoof, and it's filed under the invalidators of wiping over the hoof, because the duration of the hoof being able to wipe for the resident is 1 day and its night. So because that duration has run out, that time has expired, the wudu breaks. Right? So it's not an invalidator of the wudu under the section of the invalidators, because wiping over the hoof is a rukhsa. So it's a dispensation. So the issue of what will make the hoof invalidate the wudu is because the time period of being able to wipe has expired.
So it's almost like the condition of the rukhsa has no longer been met.
That's correct.
So almost as if kind of saying, for the conditions of salah, wudu has to be met. So it's kind of like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because of the ruling under the hoof. Right. So we'll close here, inshallah. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes things easy for the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Palestine throughout, whether they're the rank and file or the people that are striving to defend from the imams and mujahideen. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا ورسولنا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم أجمعين الحمد الرحيمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك إنه غفور رحيم حميد رحيم ولا إله إلا الله والسلام عليكم.